So during President Nixon's trip, you served as principal interpreter. I'm sure you have some interesting stories about that experience.
Well, I was the principal interpreter for Nixon only at the dinner table or the luncheon table. And he didn't have much small talk. I ended up spending a fair amount of time talking to Zhou Enlai, and who was a little bored with Nixon's absence of small talk, and others, Ye Jianying, Li Xianyan, other great figures in the pantheon at the time, and Xia Guanhua, who was the brains in the foreign ministry, as well as with Ji Pengfei, who was the acting foreign minister. But the formal interpreting I did was for the Secretary of State. And this is very interesting. Usually summits are structured so that the chief of government, the president, gets to talk about the future and areas of agreement with his opposite number. And the Secretary of State and the foreign minister argue about the disagreements. And it was essential that we do that. We needed to reestablish and reaffirm our respective positions on issues like the division of Korea, the division of Indochina, the situation in Kashmir, the role of Japan in the region, because each of us had to reassure our allies or partners that we had not sold them out. And so therefore the Shanghai Communique begins with several pages of recitation of sharp differences between the United States and China. That was the substance of the Secretary of State's talks. That's what I interpreted. It served a useful purpose, because having stated all of our differences, we then went on to say that notwithstanding these differences and the differences in our socioeconomic systems, we both regarded it as in our interest to cooperate. So that was that.
So can you explain a little bit more the importance for back home of having these differences as part of the Shanghai Communique, and then maybe go more into the importance of that document itself?
Well, obviously one purpose that the recitation of differences served was to reassure opponents of the opening, both in China and the United States, that their leaders had not sold them out, that we had remained faithful to our previous positions. Of course, that wasn't entirely true, because in effect, the United States had extended protection to China against a possible Soviet attack or humiliation. This was a shock to Japan, our principal ally in Asia, and it was unnerving to the Soviets. There was a possibility, which we all recognized, that the Soviets would overreact and reduce their willingness to compromise with the United States. In fact, the opposite happened. They became more conciliatory. They did not want to see China outflank them in a relationship with the United States. So I think from the point of view of domestic politics in both places, we handled the opposition. Nixon's visit was televised. Of course, I was there. I didn't see that, but although you can see me in the television reels from the time. What was revealed to the American people was a China that was very different than the one that they had come to imagine. And there was a sort of shock of acknowledgement, recognition that this was a more complex place than Americans had imagined, that Chinese were not necessarily the regiment of blue ants, that meaning people dressed in blue boiler suits, that Americans had imagined, and that there was a great deal more to China than they had thought. So it opened the way for further education after the trip, to try to consolidate the opening.
And so then what was the major accomplishment of the Shanghai Communique? So we discussed the discussion of differences, but what was actually agreed in that document?
Well, there was an agreement, as I said, that notwithstanding serious differences on particular issues arising from the Cold War, for the most part, and notwithstanding differences in ideology and political and economic systems, we would cooperate to counter an effort to impose hegemony. And that meant essentially the Soviet Union, but it also implied not allowing Japan to pursue hegemony again as it had in World War II. So that was the first agreement. The second agreement was to finesse the longstanding obstacle to U.S.-China relations, which was our disagreement over the Taiwan issue. The Taiwan issue is a question of what relationship Taiwan, formerly a province of the Republic of the Qing China, and again the Republic of China when it was located in Nanjing, what political relationship should it have to the rest of China, if any? The United States on June 27, 1950, had interposed the Seventh Fleet in the Taiwan Strait to prevent the continuation of the Chinese Civil War, to prevent Mao Zedong's forces from crossing the strait to attack Taiwan, or Chiang Kai-shek to counterattack the mainland from Taiwan, to which he had retreated after his defeat on the mainland. So we didn't want the Korean War to spread. We put the fleet in there. And this suspended the Civil War for most purposes. It did not end it. And it is still unended. So we went through crises in the 1950s over Quemoy, Matsu, and other offshore islands. The United States became progressively involved in support of Taipei against Beijing. This ended. The Shanghai Communique ended that. And the United States acknowledged that basically Chinese on both sides of the strait, whether they were in Taipei or in Beijing, all thought that there was only one China. Taiwan was part of China. And the United States promised not to challenge that position. We also finally agreed to the progressive withdrawal of our armed forces on Taiwan, which had been placed there during this period since June 27, 1950, as peace in the area progressed. Now, that might have meant peace in Vietnam. It might have meant a lowering of tensions in the Taiwan Strait. But in any event, we undertook to withdraw all our military forces and installations from Taiwan. And we did when we finally normalized relations with Beijing 7 years later.